Okay, let me break this down here. So I got this idea here. We're going to try and lay it out. Henry Kissinger, whoever controls money controls the world. So that was a controversial statement that Henry Kissinger made that has been debated ever since, really. If you control the monetary system in the world, if you have, for example, the global reserve currency, and if you have cornered the banking sector and the financial sector, can you in fact is that a means for sustainable domination of the world? And a lot of people have argued for and against it. Obviously, I'm going to be in more of a libertarian. I'm going to say definitely against it. Money, you can't eat money. You can't build anything with money. You still need the raw resources. You still need the manufacturing base. Uh, a society can't depend on other societies to be their slave labor forever. And that's kind of something that, an issue that the United States is facing and will continue to face, and that will become readily apparent. And another person who apparently didn't believe it or doesn't believe it is Vladimir Putin. So I heard about this paper. I'd never heard it. This was on the Duran, I think. They were talking about this paper that he put out for his thesis for a master's degree in economics, or maybe a PhD. I think it was a master's degree. And he puts out, and he was already pretty involved in politics in Russia at this time. I think he was made president in 1997 or 8, or maybe acting president at some point. I think he was made acting president in the 90s. He was handpicked by Boris Yeltsin and his crew. Apparently, because they saw him as a no nonsense, good bureaucrat that would at least keep the ship from sinking further. That was their idea, from what I understand. So he wrote this paper talking about how to develop Russia, how to get Russia out of the economic pit that it was in the 90s. And he talks a lot about the commodities sector and how important the commodities sector is going to be. And he makes some good points. You know, there was I guess some folks from the Brookings Institution that accused him of plagiarizing because I guess he had a lot of citations in this paper he wrote. And you know, research papers should have a lot of citations and a lot of, uh, you know, statements ripped off of other papers. That's kind of what a paper or a thesis is. It's not necessarily a creative writing class, but they accused him of plagiarism, and it's the Brookings Institution. So go figure, right? They're not CIA. So he goes in here, and he seems to be of the crowd, just reading this paper and his other statements, but just looking at this paper, that money does not control the world. And what actually controls the world is resources. And he mentions technology quite a bit. I've heard he's kind of a technocrat. I don't know. I don't know enough about him to really know, to make an opinion on that. But he goes through a very nice little thesis, and it kind of matches up with the way he's run the economy, you know, from his vantage point. So it's interesting. You have Russia and China pretty much looking like they're going to become close partners. And most of the world's population seeming to side with them. In terms, if you look at the countries that are actually doing sanctions, it's only 15%. Those countries only encompass 15% of the world's population. But does the United States and Europe have what it takes to go into a protracted economic war, first of all, with Russia and China? Russia being the largest commodities producer in the world, China being the largest consumer goods manufacturer in the world, with the largest industrial base by a long shot. With the West, obviously, we see, I think that we already have the answer to that question based on the boomerang effects of the sanctions, which are just going to get worse. And the politicians will not reverse course unless they think it's absolutely necessary, unless shit's really falling apart, because they'd rather double down from a strategic, politically strategic point of view in their minds. And maybe, honestly, it's better for them to double down on these bad policies than admit they were wrong. Because admitting you're wrong in politics never gets you anywhere. That's a fundamental issue with politics, which is why these people have no reverse gear. So I think it's already pretty crystal clear at this point, although there's going to be people that will never admit it, but I think it's already crystal clear that the United States and Europe don't want to have what it takes to engage in an economic war with Russia and China. Now, some people will say, everybody, the number one counter argument is going to be, oh, well, we just need more time and eventually Russia will fall apart, this, that, and the other. I don't think so. Because not only does Russia have a large commodities base, they also have a respectable manufacturing base for a country of that size. And they have lots of holdover manufacturing from the Soviet days. And you see that's evident in Ukraine. Everything is in these towns in Ukraine, whether it's Mariupol, you had Azov-style plant. Now in Severodonetsk, you had the Azot chemical factory, chemical works. But I guess, there's still a lot of factories in the former Soviet Union, especially places like Ukraine and I'm sure Western Russia. So, and then its partner, China, is by far the largest, has the largest manufacturing base. And you have Europe and the United States. The only country in Europe that has a manufacturing base is Germany. Well, there's probably more. I'm not going to say the only, but the largest manufacturing base is Germany. But they can't run their factories without energy. And then you have Britain has no manufacturing base. I think it seems like France is pretty balanced. And Italy is just a big fucking resort, apparently. And, in Greece, everybody is works for the government, and apparently the government is the only place you can go to make a living. I'm just being facetious kind of there, but, I don't know if it's still like that, but it was like that. Spain, as I said in another video, is literally doing the opposite of what one would do to respond to an inflation crisis. They're adding more fiscal stimulus. They're adding more. They're penalizing the oil and gas. It's just ridiculous. And I'm sure other countries in Europe will follow suit. You have the political systems in all Western countries are fractured, whereas Russia seems Putin has 80% approval, and in China it doesn't matter what the approval of the Communist Party is. You have the BRICS nations that are becoming a bigger influence in the world, and it just seems so. I think the answer to the question of whether the United States and Europe and its 2 or 3 allies in Asia and Australia, whether they can withstand a protracted economic war with the Russia-China bloc and India bloc, I don't think there's even a question in that. And we'll see how long it takes for that to dawn on the majority of the people. I think it already is actually quickly becoming the mainstream opinion, not the mainstream opinion, the popular opinion, is that the sanctions were a mistake, especially things like seizing the reserves of Russia. That was a big mistake because that damaged the trust of all of the countries in the world that might want to have reserves in the United States so they could do business with the United States. Well, if just doing something the United States doesn't like constitutes a reason for your reserves to be stolen, hundreds of billions of dollars. They did it to Afghanistan as well. The Biden administration stole the reserves out of Afghanistan. I think I can, it seems like a petulant sort of move on the part of the Biden administration. People are starving in Afghanistan right now because the Biden administration, in their fit of rage, took withheld all the reserves from the Taliban. There was no point to doing that other than to punish the regime, but they aren't actually punishing the regime. There's millions of people descending into extreme hunger and famine over there. So it was a petulant move. But that just goes to show you how broken our system is. We have a system based off of nepotism, rather, a leadership hierarchy that's based off of nepotism rather than merit. So I don't think the United States and Europe really have a chance economically. Now, the real question is, could the United States and Europe win a war with the Russia-China bloc? And I would argue absolutely not. And this is shocking to some people. After all, we spend 20 times or 30 times more than either Russia or China on our military. Sure, we do. And half of that, maybe a little more than half, about 400 some odd billion, goes to private contractors. And they mark everything up that they do. Everything they make, every piece of equipment, every weapon they make is marked up exorbitantly. It's overly complicated. Okay, most of it's scam artistry. And so this whole idea, the United States spends this amount of money on their defense, therefore there's no way they can win. Well, we have to look at what they're spending that money on. And let's not forget, many countries with a technology advantage, many armies with a technology advantage have been decisively defeated by much lesser advanced armies. We can go to the Romans. My favorite is the Franco-Prussian War. Just the Prussian army in general was based on leadership more than technology, right? And we're having problems already. One of the things I wanted to show here was just these articles started popping up back in March. Pentagon scrambles to replenish weapon stock sent to Ukraine. And here, they try to paint a rosy picture of the situation, but I think the undertones kind of betray the author's actual concern that the United States was already severely depleting its weapons stockpiles at the time, right? And the Pentagon was scrambling to replenish weapons stocks sent to Ukraine. And I read somewhere that even if, like, for example, just with Stingers alone, which we've sent a lot of Stingers over there, and they've only been marginally successful. The Russians managed to counter the Stingers pretty quickly. I mean, if you want to know more about this kind of stuff, you go to Jacob Dreisand, you go to the Duran's really good. There's all sorts of really legit sources of information out there. Armchair Warlord on Twitter. So basically, the Stingers were somewhat effective in the beginning, and then the Russian SUs, which are the primary ground attack aircraft, that's like their version of the A-10 Warthog, but I think maybe they have more capabilities. They just don't have that massive Gatling gun, but they just started flying really low. And that was an easy counter to the Stinger missiles. So they haven't been all that effective since then, and we've sent a lot of them over there. And I think Lockheed said even if they got the contract today, because they're not. First of all, they said they're not going to ramp up production at all until they get a contract. So I think on May 17th. You can go to the Department of Defense contract site, and on May 17th, I think they amended a contract, gave them a ridiculous amount of money. I don't remember exactly how much, but it was like hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, 900 billion. And they got the contract through. So Lockheed said even with the contract, it would take them a year to just even get up to not even enough, like 4,000. Okay, but we've already sent much more than that over there. So long and short of it is Lockheed doesn't have the production capacity, and they said getting the production capacity to send a sustained, to sustain that level of arms shipments to Ukraine might not even be possible. And Lockheed Martin's not the only contractor to be saying this. And the fact of the matter is, the United States doesn't have an industrial base anymore. So this was a really good Zero Hedge article, and it goes into some depth on how many munitions and different like artillery shells are being used in Ukraine, and what the United States would have to do to match that kind of consumption and maintain its levels of stocks. Now, by all accounts, it doesn't seem like Russia is having a problem replacing these munitions that they're using. They're using something like 10,000 artillery shells a day. Maybe they're using millions in a month. It's a ridiculous amount. And there's no sign. There were articles coming out for the first couple months that Russia's going to run out of munitions. Russia's going to run out of munitions. They're going to run out of ammo. They started saying that in March, and it was, of course, always these unnamed officials, and they're probably, they're probably CIA sources or whatever, State Department, guys or whatever, that are working for the State Department in some cursory fashion or directly. But these people are calling months ago saying there's no way Russia's going to be able to maintain this level of production and keep their ammo stocks up. And the reason they were saying that, they probably honestly believed it at the time. It was all sorts of people were saying it. Go search on your preferred search engine, and you'll find a lot of people were talking about Russia running out of ammo, and it hasn't happened yet. And I think a lot of those same people can't believe that Russia could sustain those kinds of levels of munitions use because they know that the United States couldn't right now. And that's because the United States just doesn't have the industrial base that it used to have. And people point to World War II and say, well, the United States could ramp up production really quickly. Just look at World War II. Big difference between World War II and today. First of all, World War II came after the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted about 10 years. Before that was the Roaring 20s, when for a sustained 20 years from the turn of the 20th century until like the late 20s, manufacturing grew at a rate never seen before or since for a sustained period of time. Now, sure, a lot of those factories were closed during the Great Depression, but they were still there by the time World War II hit. They could easily be reopened, ramped back up. Nowadays, the factory infrastructure itself is gone. It's not that we have a lot of mothballed factories like we had in at the beginning of World War II. We have no factories. Those buildings have been destroyed by and large, replaced with developments or whatnot. So we couldn't get that infrastructure running up really quickly like we did in World War II. So the question remains, would we be able to actually fight Russia and win against Russia and China? I'm not saying we would lose. Okay, I'm not going to underestimate us that deeply, but I would say that it wouldn't be a walk in the park. Well, obviously, if it went to nuclear, it wouldn't matter either way. But let's just assume that we managed to have a conventional war without nukes with Russia and China for some time. I think that our industrial production wouldn't be able to keep up with it. You know, and this goes back to full circle to what I started out this idea with, which is Henry Kissinger said in the 1970s and early 1980s, something like that. I don't know when he said it, but he did say, if one controls money, one controls the world. It was like a whole thing. He said, if one controls the food, they can control the country. If they control the oil, they control the continent. And if they control the money, they control the world. And obviously, I don't believe that's true. Money, you need goods and services to buy with that money, or else the money's useless. It doesn't matter if you go to the grocery store and you want some organic egg whites and there's none there, then you're not getting any organic egg whites. If you want some brand of cereal that's not there, you really want that, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you're not getting that bowl of cereal. And if you go to Cuba and you want, I don't know if it's still like this. I'm not like this huge anti-Cuba person, but let's say if you go, from what I've seen of recent videos, there's still a lot of shortages. You can go into a coffee shop in Havana and they'll tell you they don't have any coffee. All they have is water. A burger place, I saw it on a couple of videos. I've seen stuff like that. It doesn't look like, terrible there, but you do have the shortages. And it doesn't matter how much of their, whatever their money is they have, they're not getting that. They're not getting those items that are not available, and we're heading into that now. And so it doesn't matter how much money you have as a country, if you have no manufacturing base to build weapons and the raw materials that compose those weapons, or you can't get them, then you're not going to be able to sustain a protracted war in the industrial age, the age of industrial warfare. It's not going to happen. And I have to add on top of that, besides these huge problems and shortcomings, the other problem in the West, I mentioned it a minute ago, politically and as a society we're fractured, whereas they're pretty united over there in Russia and China for maybe different reasons. But because China would be, they're more forced and they're ruled by fear and all that. And the Russians seem like, actually, from what I see, even though the ruling party seems pretty heavy-handed, it seems like a normal Western democracy to me from what I see. I don't see anything that would indicate this is an autocracy or some bullshit, whatever buzzword, misused historical reference they throw out. So, to me, they seem very unified over there. And what's also the problem over here is the leadership. In the United States, the leadership is terrible. And I don't know if the leadership's better in Russia. I should hope so. I would say I doubt our military brass at this time could execute a war to the degree that level of warfare and do as well as the Russians did. I doubt it. Okay, it was easy for us to walk over Saddam Hussein's army that had been starved up to that point the whole country had been starved for 10 years. So we rolled over a starving country in a couple months, and eventually got our asses handed to us through asymmetric warfare because we couldn't control Iraq. Okay? We couldn't control Afghanistan. So we definitely couldn't walk into Ukraine like that and control Ukraine. Now, while we have been able to influence Ukraine because our money, we can print as much money as we want for the time being. What happens when that parade ends? So long and short of it is, the idea is, I think that in an actual conventional ground war, I don't think the United States and its allies will be able to really. I don't know about getting our asses kicked because we still do have a lot of weapons, but I don't think we would be able to roll over Russia. It would be at most a stalemate. That's the way I would see it. It would probably, but of course, it would end in a nuclear war most likely, so it doesn't matter anyway, I guess. But that's my idea. Need to put that out there just to have it out there. All right, I am out.